Good afternoon. Hi. It's very exciting to be here. Hopefully we'll keep you awake as we go through the presentation. It was fun watching Steve and listening to Steve's talk as he hit on a lot of themes that I had already built into my PowerPoint. Of course, coming from a tech background, we've got to have slides, right? So first I want to start off with the theme of changing the world and leadership. And I decided that we really need to put our mindset in, you will change the world. Right? I just want that to sink in for a second. You will change the world. Right? Doesn't that feel different when you think about it that way? Not that you might, but you will. So I think that's a very important part of leadership and creating a positive vision for what you're going to do. And we're going to talk through some of that here today. Excuse me while I hit these. So this was a recent blog post, actually just a few weeks ago, by Seth Godin, who's a popular blogger, about the tragedy of small expectations. And expectations, as he says, aren't guarantees. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. But if you don't have expectations and strong positive expectations and aspirations, then you're not likely to achieve much, right? But you can't listen to the folks that say you can't do it. And I found that the bigger your aspiration and expectation, the more resistance you'll likely face. The more people that will tell you you can't achieve that because you were born in the wrong country, or you came from the wrong family, or you don't have enough money, right? So don't listen to that, and make sure that you understand your vision. You set a vision for yourself and your path with strong expectations, and then others around you will follow you. Now, I came from a background that you would not predict necessarily much success. So I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, came from a large family that actually, on my mother's side, was Serbian. 3 generations away. So 3 generations in the U.S. Big family, 36 cousins. Learned how to play Serbian music when I was a kid. Many musicians in our family that play all over the world. So just a little bit of a picture about my background. Most of my cousins did not go to college. Grew up Serbian Orthodox. My father was not Serbian. He didn't really know what he was. He had a mixed heritage. But he was a Vietnam War veteran and worked in steel mills and was an electrician. So he was a very technical person, but didn't go to college. And worked very hard, but didn't make a lot of money. And he was also an alcoholic. So he was also not always the best father, but he had good intentions. But he just did not know how to, he didn't know how to raise kids necessarily, right? But he wanted the best. We knew he wanted the best for us, but he didn't know how to provide it. And this was the environment that I grew up in. And I had an expectation, because I knew he had an expectation, that we would do better than he would. Right? That was the expectation that he had. He didn't know how we would do it, but that's what he wanted for his children. So I went to school in electrical engineering. So he was a techie, he was an electrician, I had good grades. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, but I knew that the world was going to be all about technology. And so I knew that if I had a degree in electrical engineering, I could probably do anything I wanted to do, right? So I didn't really worry about it when I was in college, about what am I going to do when I grow up. I just wanted to get that degree because I knew that would be the foundation of the future. The second thing I learned early on was how to combine my skill with my passion, which was music, as I explained. So I went to the dean of engineering school and said, computers and music are starting to really come together. And he said, you're right. Let me introduce you to a professor at the Cleveland Institute of Music. And we started the first ever curriculum in computers and music and digital recording back in the mid-'80s, which I thought, now I got excited. I wasn't excited about school before, but now I was excited because now I could see that what I was learning with electrical engineering could apply directly to my passion, which was music. And so I also like this from an entrepreneur standpoint because it represents a left brain and a right brain, which happens to be kind of my profile. So over the last 20-some years, I've been both an entrepreneur and, as Danny said, an investor, a VC, which I really enjoy because you get to invest in lots of different companies and working with very bright entrepreneurs that are changing the world, that are working on problems that some of us won't see for 10 or 20 years. And that, to me, was very exciting. I also had a small stint working on the presidential election in 2012. So that's a little bit of background on me. As I was doing the venture work, I did start share this. Actually, it started in 2005. So I was an investor in a company that we sold to AOL for about $500 million. And I started seeing that the internet was becoming more people-oriented, right, instead of data-oriented. And I reached out to a professor at University of Illinois, Dr. David Goldberg, who was the world-renowned scientist in the area of computer optimization and genetic algorithms. He's literally the inventor of genetic algorithms. And we founded Share This. And it now reaches 700 million people a month across the globe. Headquarters is now in Palo Alto, California. We also have an office in LA and Chicago and New York. And have been growing very quickly. You probably see the icon all over the web as you're surfing. But I stayed in Cincinnati because my kids were in Cincinnati. We have 3 children. My wife Laura's here today as well, visiting Romania. The 3 kids are 23, 21, and 19. And I did not want to move them. So I made a choice at that point, which is I was going to stay in Cincinnati with our family, but we're going to make the headquarters for the company in Palo Alto. And when I did that, I moved from CEO to chairman. And we've helped them with their passions and mixing their skills and passions. So my son, who just graduated with a degree in aerospace engineering, has used that to go into the automotive industry to test cars, which he's super excited about and we're super excited about. And we're doing that with each of our kids. We found that figuring out what your passion is and then realizing that there really are no limits, that you can do anything you want at any age, as long as you put the effort into it, will take you very far. And so they've done some incredible things because we've had that attitude. So in addition to Share This, I'm also working on this thing called Centrifuge. Centrifuge is interesting because it was a nonprofit started by all the big companies in Cincinnati, Ohio. The biggest one that you probably know is Procter & Gamble. They came together and said, we need more venture-backed startups in Cincinnati. Cincinnati is a city of about 2 million people. And they asked me to run a fund, which is about $60 million, and we invest in other early-stage venture funds. And we work with all the accelerators and startups in Cincinnati. The one that's best known in the US is Brandery. Brandery's been ranked in the top 10 accelerators in the last 6 years. And they have candidates come from all over the world for the Brandery. And we're building this tech community in Cincinnati. We've invested in 10 funds, from Techstars, if you've heard of Techstars, in Boulder, Colorado, to Lear Ventures, to Upfront Ventures in LA. 10 funds that represent about $2 billion that we're tying into Cincinnati. And it's really exciting. We're here talking with Don Lothrop to some of his friends here in Romania about how that could apply here as well. So there's some learnings I'm going to take from this and apply later in the presentation. So that's a little bit of background. So back to you will change the world. Now that we've decided that's true, the question is how? Right? How are you going to change the world? And given what's going on, I may have a sense for how that's going to take place. And the first thing is, obviously, and Steve mentioned it, technology is in your favor, right? We've seen unprecedented amount of access to technology, from telecommunications, which in the last 20 years has developed and allowed countries to leapfrog, from wireline communications to wireless and mobile, and the cloud. So some of you may have heard, if you know Mark Andreessen, right? He is known for saying, software is eating the world. I think it was 2011. Right? Basically, software is just taking over everything and disrupting industries. Well, that's actually been updated recently, and it is mobile's taken over, is eating the world. Right? So your future as a leader and the way you're going to change the world is likely going to be through mobile. Right? We're in very much a mobile-first world. So you need to be thinking about that. So if you want to learn more about this, I'm going to pull some comments from his partner, Benedict Evans, who has a presentation. You can go on SlideShare if you want and see this presentation on mobile is eating the world. And he talks about all the ways that mobile is changing the landscape of technology and the internet itself and all of our attention. All right, so I'm going to hit a couple of those highlights. One, this is a graph showing the growth of smartphones versus PCs. Right? Huge amount of growth in mobile technology. Matter of fact, the iPhone 6, just the weekend that iPhone 6 launched, there are 25 times more transistors, CPO transistors, than that were in all of Earth in 1995, just on the one weekend. So the explosion of technology and accessibility of technology is unprecedented. And there are people, like Steve said, sitting on hay carts with horses on their phones, right? So it's not just the privilege. The cost of these phones have come down. The lowest cost smartphone from Samsung is $35, right? So anybody can have it. So the prediction is by 2020, 80% of adults will have smartphones, right? Right now in the US, over half the time you spend online is done on your smartphone. Probably not too different here. And the power of that smartphone, 625 times more powerful than a 1995 Pentium computer. So that has dramatic effects on the way the world operates at this point. Because of that, that's also transformed this market for apps, all the apps that you run on your phone. People are saying, this is now the appization of the economy. The web is dead. We're in a post-web world. It's now about the apps. So this year it's expected to be almost 36 billion, or over 36 billion spent on and through apps on mobile phones. Okay, so it's a huge, huge shift. So think about it. By 2020, there'll be 2 to 3 times more smartphones than computers. And smartphones are actually a lot more capable of a lot of different things than computers are. Right? We don't think of it that way, but they really are. When you think about all the location data we get with our phones, with sensors that can be on your phone to measure what you're doing, measure your health, record all your transactions and your payments. So the opportunity on mobile is extraordinary. So now you know why you're going to change the world with mobile. Part of what's happening with mobile is there's this pendulum swinging, a shift that's happening. So when you look back in the computer industry, it started out with mainframes and dumb terminals, right? All the intelligence was on the mainframe. And then PCs came along. And then we had things like client-server architecture, which meant more logic was pushed out to the PC, right? And we weren't as dependent on a mainframe. Then the web comes along with the thin client, excuse me, and now you have web servers and data centers, and you have a thin client again, kind of like the mainframe days. Well, now it's swinging back from the browsers back to the mobile phone because we have all this power and capability in the mobile phone. And meanwhile, we have data centers. Amazon can't build them fast enough all over the world that are draining power and creating enormous amounts of heat. And so how can we take advantage of this huge inventory of mobile phones that everybody's carrying around with them to do more? So there's a shift that's happening right now to change the way apps are developed. Some of you may have heard of an app development platform called Meteor. Andreessen invested in this company. The reason they invested in this company is because they understand this. And the core of their technology is built on a notion of data on the wire, which means they're no longer sending a bunch of HTML code to the client. They're just sending the data about the state of the application. If you're playing a game, they're just sending a position data about your character or your chess piece or what have you. So it's radically changing the way developers are able to develop, and it's making it a lot easier. So they're replacing all of this code and logic that you had to develop before for a mobile device to keep track of the client-side data and what's happening with the user interface. Matter of fact, they have something really interesting. You see there it says speculative client-side updates. They have this term called optimistic UI, which I think is really cool. It's like, how can the user interface be optimistic? It's optimistic because it's anticipating what it thinks the state of your application is on your phone, and it makes it that until it gets data that says otherwise, which makes everything faster. So very cool. I'd encourage you to, if you're a techie, I'd encourage you to look at it, check it out. It's also really interesting because it works for both experts and novices. So you can get started with Meteor, and it also has the tools and the power if you're a hardcore developer. So we're seeing a lot of this with the startups in the US, and I think this is a major trend that you should be paying attention to if you're going to be a tech entrepreneur. The next trend is the collaborative economy, right? Some of you may have seen this. So industries are being transformed every day by the collaborative economy, right? And if you look at what's going on here, what's in common with all these companies? They don't own any assets, right? Uber doesn't own any taxi cars, right? Facebook doesn't own any content. Airbnb doesn't own any real estate, right? Yet they're totally disrupting the industry. So that's a dramatic shift in the way industries operate. This is a collaborative economy chart that a guy named Jeremiah Ouyang created. He's a consultant that has been making his living talking about collaborative economy. And what you see here is there's literally not an industry that hasn't been touched by the collaborative economy, by startups who are developing mobile apps like Uber that can dramatically change industry. Now, one of those industries also relates, if you're a leader, tech startup, entrepreneur, and you want to get funding, that area has been impacted by the collaborative economy as well. It's called crowdfunding. How many have heard of crowdfunding, crowdsourcing? Just about everybody. Good. I was afraid of this. I was going to come here and everybody's going to know all this already. So there's a number of different programs that you can go to, whether you're doing project-based funding or you want to get equity crowdfunding. Two of the ones I want to talk about here are AngelList and Our Crowd. Matter of fact, AngelList, I did a lookup, and it looks like there's 382 companies from Romania that have been listed on AngelList. Now, I don't know if they've all raised money, but they're at least on AngelList. And this is a very important phenomenon. Not only does it mean that you can get access to this money for investors in your company, but it means you can create a network of customers, a network of partners, a network of test users, right? So it really is a great platform for marketing your company and finding partners on a global scale. So it doesn't matter where you are. You can find them anywhere. AngelList is differentiated in that it's an open marketplace, so it's ad hoc. You go out there and investors find you. Well, what they've done that's unique is they've created the idea of syndicates. Syndicate is a word that's used to mean investors come together, basically, right? And people can follow other angel investors. So if I'm an investor on AngelList and I'm investing in a startup, other investors might want to invest in that startup too because they think I know what I'm doing, maybe. So these syndicates are really powerful because you can put them together to raise larger amounts of funds, right? So it's, even if you don't raise money on AngelList, if you're a startup, I encourage all startups to make sure they have a profile on AngelList for marketing purposes. The next one is called Our Crowd, and this comes from John Medved in Israel, but it's also now global. Both of these platforms, by the way, have helped companies raise over $100 million last year. Our Crowd is a little bit more like a venture firm in that they will source the startups, they will do the due diligence, they will write it up. So it's not as ad hoc as AngelList is, and it's a more accredited investor base, so more qualified investors. The result of that is the average investment on Our Crowd raises $1.2 million. So they raise a lot more than AngelList does. But it's not necessarily as broad. So these are the two that I pay attention to now, and I recommend to entrepreneurs. Okay, so that's some of the tech shift, collaborative economy, how you're going to get funding. Let's talk a little bit about company building, and a couple book recommendations because we're not going to be able to cover everything today. So I want to give you some other ideas of things you might want to go read. And one is Chip Conley. Chip was the founder of second largest boutique hotel chain in the U.S. And now he's the senior VP of hospitality for Airbnb. Okay, and he's written several books. Peak, I really like. And what he has done is he's taken Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that, and he's used it as a planning tool for companies. Okay, and I'll walk you through some of this. So we've used this at Share This. So there's a series of pyramids here. One is the employee and company pyramid. Okay, and just like in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you look at employees, what do employees need? Well, first they need the base motivation. Just like Maslow says, you need your physiological needs, food and water. You need to get paid, right? People expect you to get paid. Next level is recognition. Once you recognize people on your team and you give recognition for their contributions, you create loyalty with your team, right? But ultimately, to really be successful, you want to create meaning in your work. And meaning is what drives the inspiration of your team to do more, to work harder, to challenge each other. So this is an important stack for your culture of your company. Once you have that, then you can look at what that group is going to do, what that team is going to do for your customers. In the same way, at a base level, you want to meet the customer expectations, right? And historically, the last 20 years or so, companies would do these satisfaction surveys. But they found that those aren't necessarily helpful because people want more than just to be satisfied. So a common example is if you're asked to, you go to buy let's say you buy a car or you go to a hotel and they give you a little survey and say, would you please rank me on a scale of 1 to 10, how well did I do? By the way, my bonus depends on this, so give me a 10. The result is you're not really getting good input, right? You're just helping that person in their job, which is great, but you're not really giving the company what they really want, which is good input in terms of how good was their product or service. So we have to do better than that. And if you really help the company or the customer meet their goals, you create strong commitment, which means you can lock in commitment and revenue and longer term contracts with your customers. But what we really want to do, if you're doing a startup and you're trying to create the next market leader, is you want to unlock their unrecognized needs. You want to do something because you understand their business so well that you've just totally changed their business in a way they didn't even expect. And that creates evangelism. Evangelism creates more customers. They go out and tell others, you wouldn't believe what this startup has done for me. It's completely changed the way we make reservations in our hotel. So, and as most venture-backed startups, that's what we want to achieve, right? It's not good enough just to be generating satisfactory results like everybody else, right? We're looking for dramatic change to business. And finally, this last pyramid is the investor pyramid, investor truth. And investors start with first building trust, right? You want to make sure that they understand that you are spending your money wisely, that you're reporting back to them, that you're being honest and transparent. As you go up, you build a stronger bond and relationship with the investor. But ultimately what you want is to build a legacy. The investors are investing in your company because they believe in you and because they believe in what your vision is, right? And so that's what's so interesting about these crowdsourced programs. These are people that are saying, look, I love what you're doing. I want to be a part of it. It's their way to participate in that success and that legacy. And that, again, turns into evangelism and pride of ownership on behalf of the investors. So this is what you want, to have your company surrounded with this framework, which creates a virtuous cycle for the company. You have a unique corporate culture that's energized, that's building enthusiastic staff, making customers very loyal, producing hopefully profits and growth, and that is the cycle that we want to get into. So leaders make the future, right? If anybody's read any Malcolm Gladwell books, the first part of this is about reimagining the world. We just talked about this. Take mobile, take collaborative economy, and how can you reimagine the world? How can you reimagine the way you go back and forth to work or to school? How can you reimagine the way you learn, right? It starts with that kind of imagination. And what I found, by the way, with many, if not every entrepreneur that I've seen that's had a successful company, there also is a David and Goliath moment. That is, there's a point when they take on the system, where you take on a union, you take on the incumbent, the major, the leader in the market, and so you're preparing for that. As you're building your startup, I think you're preparing for that day when you're going to totally transform a market, and that's that David and Goliath moment. And starts by, this is something that Josh Lerner has in one of his latest books, the difference between having a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And I love this. This is saying, how can I do things and learn as I do them? Companies don't grow unless the CEO is growing. Just as Steve was saying, you can't go run several countries and then come in and run Romania, right? All these leaders are learning. We're all learning. And the employees underneath you want to see that you're learning. If you're learning and growing, they will learn and grow. So you need to have this growth mindset versus this fixed mindset. The fixed mindset says, I just do things to be safe. I do things so I know I can get straight A's, right? Because I want to look good. So if you think about the implications of that, right? The fixed mindset says they want to avoid challenges. The growth mindset says I want to embrace them. Fixed mindset says I want to give up in obstacles. Growth says I want to persist in obstacles, etc. Right? So some of you probably are on the right side on the growth mindset, I would imagine, or you wouldn't be here. Right? But for me, this was a very helpful way to think about how you take on problems. Because again, if you're going to run a company, if you're going to start a startup, you will be learning constantly, and you're going to have the courage to grow and face problems that you've never faced before. Another recommendation here, John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And it really sums up in that leadership is influence. So once you've reimagined the world, now it's time to convince your founders to join you, to quit their jobs. It's time to convince your friends and families to invest. It's time to convince strangers to invest, right? It's time to convince customers to join you, to buy your product. So at the end of the day, it's all about influence, right? How well you communicate your vision, how passionate you are about your vision, and how well you execute against that. So at the sum, leadership's about influence. And if you look behind you and there are people behind you, you're leading. If you look behind you and you don't have anybody behind you, then maybe you're not influencing, right? So you need to check that every once in a while. Have friends and advisors to help you understand